A young boy disappeared during a family picnic, sparking 2 decades of mystery and heartache. Then, a forgotten toy truck found in an attic uncovered secrets that changed everything. This is a story of loss, courage, and unwavering hope. Please kindly let me know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below before we begin. I look forward to hearing from you. The 4th of July in 2003 was the kind of summer day people dream about when winter clutches the hills of Pennsylvania in ice and silence. At Lake Bramble, where thick trees hung like curtains around the glistening water and birds carried on in cheerful chorus, the Whitaker family laid out blankets and folding chairs under the high sun. Smoke rose from the grill, kids ran barefoot across the grass, and adults sipped lemonade with the kind of lazy satisfaction that only a day free of worry can bring. Carol Whitaker, mother of two, watched her youngest, little Ethan, dart between trees with a red plastic truck in his hand, his laughter bright as sunlight off the lake. Ethan was 5 then, all tousled blonde hair and scraped knees, full of energy and wonder. That truck went everywhere with him. It had a chipped wheel and a faded flame decal, but to Ethan, it might as well have been a real fire engine. That afternoon, he was content digging into the dirt near the tree line, a little ways from the main picnic area, still close enough for Carol to hear his voice rise every now and then in imaginary siren sounds or narration of some grand rescue. She remembered turning for just a moment, handing a plate of food to her teenage daughter Amy, who was sulking under her headphones. When she looked back, Ethan was gone. At first, it was just confusion, not panic. Maybe he'd followed the sound of the ice cream truck down the road. Maybe he'd gone to the lake's edge to see the ducks. Carol called his name, soft at first, then louder. David, her husband, stood from the grill and shaded his eyes, scanning the lawn. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The laughter faded. The birds seemed quieter. The sky didn't look as bright anymore. They searched the lake's edge, the woods, behind every tree and under every canoe. Other families joined in. The park ranger radioed for help. Within an hour, sirens were on site. Flashlights cut through the dusk. Dogs were brought in. Volunteers combed the entire park. But no sign of Ethan. No small body. No red truck. Just silence. The search went on for days. Carol didn't sleep. She refused to go home. She wandered the woods, calling his name, whispering promises into the shadows. David sat alone most nights, face blank, as if grief hadn't yet figured out how to enter him. Amy grew quiet, guilt tightening around her like a winter coat she couldn't remove. The community mourned with them. Prayer circles were held, posters went up, news vans parked outside their house for a week. Then a month passed, then 3, and nothing. The police, despite their best efforts, found no leads. No footprints, no blood, no signs of struggle. One ranger thought he saw a man walking near the tree line that day. Someone in a fishing vest, maybe in his 40s, with shaggy hair and a limp. But the sketch that came from that description was generic, faceless. No one came forward. No suspects emerged. Eventually, the case went cold, filed away like so many others that time buries in dust. Carol became something else entirely. She stopped going out. She never removed Ethan's drawings from the fridge. She never donated his toys. His room, frozen in 2003, remained a shrine. The baseball glove on the dresser, the bedsheets printed with astronauts, the faded night light still plugged in. Every birthday, she made a cake. Every Christmas, she bought one extra gift. She talked to him sometimes, sitting on his bed with her eyes closed. Not imagining, believing. David lasted 2 more years in the house before packing up and leaving. The marriage, already strained, couldn't survive the weight of loss. He moved to Florida and remarried quietly. Amy graduated, left for college, and rarely returned. She didn't blame her mother. Not really, but the house was too full of ghosts. She couldn't breathe in it. Yet Carol never moved. She grew old in that house, her hair turning silver, her back curved by sorrow. The neighbors saw her less and less. The curtains stayed drawn. Once a woman with a laugh that could light a room, Carol became a fixture of stillness, a relic of a family that used to be. Sometimes people whispered about her at the grocery store or in church pews. They'd say how strong she was, how sad, how she never gave up hope. Then, in the spring of 2025, 22 years after that picnic, Carol's life came to its quiet end. A stroke took her in her sleep. Amy, now nearly 40 and living 2 states away, returned to handle the estate. The house smelled like dust and lavender. Photos lined every wall. Ethan's wide grin, frozen in age. It was as if time had never dared to pass through. It took days to go through everything. The garage was packed with boxes, the basement with old furniture, and then there was the attic, that hot, narrow crawl space above the second floor, where Carol rarely went. Amy climbed the rickety ladder on the 3rd day. She hadn't been up there since she was a child. Sunlight came through the small round window, illuminating a sea of cardboard and cobwebs. She shuffled through boxes of winter clothes, broken ornaments, yellowed letters. And then she saw it. Half buried beneath a moth-eaten quilt was a red plastic truck. One wheel chipped, the flame decal still visible under the dust. Amy stared at it, heart thudding so hard she couldn't breathe. It was Ethan's. There was no doubt. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, years collapsing around her like dominoes. She turned it over. Something was lodged under the chassis, a scrap of yellowed paper, folded tight. With stiff fingers, she opened it. The handwriting was wobbly, barely legible, but she could read it. I tried to come back. Amy dropped to her knees. The attic, the house, the world, it all spun. Because if Ethan had been gone 22 years, who had written that? The attic remained silent, but the silence was no longer innocent. Amy sat there for a long time, the folded scrap of paper trembling in her hand, the toy truck resting like a relic on her lap. Dust filtered through the shaft of light behind her, motes swirling in the air like spirits made visible. I tried to come back. The words echoed louder in her head than anything had in years. Her first instinct had been denial, that maybe it was a cruel joke, some remnant of her mother's hope. But the handwriting, unsteady and uneven, was clearly a child's, and the very thought made Amy's skin prickle cold beneath her blouse. Whoever had written it wasn't trying to deceive. They were trying to be found. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak in the old house stirred a memory. The hallway light blinking the way it used to when Ethan was afraid of the dark. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, like a lullaby playing in reverse. She wandered the halls barefoot, fingers trailing along the walls, brushing over picture frames hung askew with age. Every image in the house had frozen the family in time. Her mother's smile before the sorrow set in. Her father's arms around them all. Ethan, gap-toothed and grinning, always holding that same little truck. Amy stood in front of the largest portrait in the living room and just stared. The next morning, she returned to the attic with gloves and a flashlight. She examined the spot where she'd found the truck, digging gently through boxes, blankets, even old wallpaper rolls. But nothing else turned up. No envelope, no second note, no lock of hair, no other memento. Just the toy and that single sentence that had shattered the stillness of grief. She carefully placed the truck and the note into a plastic bag and locked them in her car's glove compartment. Something inside her had shifted. A cord once snapped by time had grown taut again. Later that afternoon, Amy drove into town to the Bramble County Sheriff's Office. She sat across from the receptionist, trying not to fidget, until a young deputy ushered her into a small side room with faded blue walls and a dusty ficus plant in the corner. She laid the bag on the table and explained what she'd found. The deputy, clearly uncertain, called in a superior. An hour later, a door opened, and a familiar voice filled the room. Amy Whitaker? I'll be damned. She turned and stared at the man approaching, graying now, his face more lined than she remembered, but the voice gave him away. Detective Ron Ellison. He'd been a rookie back in 2003, barely older than she had been, but he'd taken her brother's case personally. She remembered his kindness, the way he'd knelt to her eye level and promised they'd find Ethan. That promise had never been kept. She wondered if it had haunted him too. Ellison picked up the bag and studied the note inside. He didn't speak for nearly a minute. When he did, his voice was soft. Where exactly did you find this? She told him, the attic inside the toy truck, tucked in a box that hadn't been moved in decades. "And you're sure this is the truck?" he asked. Amy nodded, her throat tight. "There's no doubt. He never went anywhere without it." He nodded slowly. "We'll get this tested. Handwriting analysis. Maybe even forensic DNA from the paper, if we're lucky. It's a long shot after all these years, but it's not impossible." He offered her coffee, which she declined, and for the next half hour, they reviewed everything. The picnic, the hours before Ethan vanished, the search, the dead ends. It was all etched in her memory like a scar. Ellison listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes in a pad. "You know," he said at one point, "I never forgot about Ethan. Some cases you carry with you, no matter how cold they get." Amy blinked back, unexpected tears. "Do you think he could have written it?" she asked. "After all this time, is it even possible?" Ellison exhaled slowly. "If it's authentic, and I'm not saying it isn't, then it changes everything. That truck was never recovered during the search. And if it wound up in your attic, it means someone brought it back. Someone who had access to the house. Possibly even someone Ethan trusted." The thought chilled her, that someone could have entered their home, possibly while Carol still lived there, and left behind the truck and note, like a breadcrumb meant only for Amy to find. It wasn't just eerie. It was intimate. Whoever had done it hadn't wanted to be discovered. Not then. But maybe now, years later, they wanted the truth to surface. Or maybe guilt had finally outweighed fear. Amy returned to the house that evening in a fog. She stood outside for a long time before going in. The porch creaked beneath her feet. The screen door squealed the way it always had. Inside, she stood in Ethan's room, untouched for over 2 decades. She sat on his bed, just as her mother once had, and looked around the space where childhood had stopped. She held the memory of her brother's voice in her mind and whispered, "I'm going to find out what happened to you. I promise." The house didn't respond, but it didn't feel so quiet anymore. The morning after Amy's visit to the sheriff's office, the clouds rolled low over Bramble County, casting a pale gray light over the town that seemed to dull the colors of everything it touched. Amy sat at the kitchen table of her childhood home, a steaming cup of black coffee in her hands, staring through the window at the backyard where she and Ethan once played. The same worn swing still hung from the oak tree, its ropes frayed but intact, gently swaying in the wind without anyone touching it. For a moment, it looked like a memory trying to come back to life. Her mind kept circling back to the note, the simple, heartbreaking phrase that refused to loosen its grip. "I try to come back." It hadn't left her thoughts since she'd read it, not even for a breath. She had read it aloud a dozen times, tested the cadence, the way a 5-year-old might write it, imagining his small fingers struggling to form each letter. But it wasn't just the words that haunted her. It was the fact that the note existed at all. It implied agency, that Ethan had been alive after the day he vanished, that he had tried, in some way, to return, but failed. She began going through boxes of family belongings in the basement, chasing any clue that might have been overlooked. Carol had kept everything. There were school report cards, drawings on construction paper, broken ornaments, cassette tapes labeled in neat cursive. Amy found a stack of Ethan's early drawings, crooked stick figures and fire trucks with comically large wheels. But something struck her as odd as she flipped through them. One of the drawings, dated several months after his disappearance, depicted a small house surrounded by trees. It was drawn with a heavy hand, as if the crayon had nearly torn the paper. The son had an angry face. The house had no doors. Amy stared at it, her heart slowing. "Why would this be here?" she whispered to herself. The paper was tucked inside a manila folder labeled Ethan's Art, meaning Carol had categorized it intentionally. But how had she gotten a drawing supposedly created after Ethan disappeared? Was it misdated? Or had something happened that no one ever knew? Later that afternoon, she drove back to the sheriff's office and showed the drawing to Ellison. He studied it with furrowed brows, holding it gently between gloved fingers. "Are you absolutely sure this wasn't made before he vanished?" Amy shook her head. He couldn't draw like this before. His earlier ones were messy scribbles. This is deliberate, focused, even angry. Ellison sat back, visibly unsettled. "If your mom received this after the disappearance and never told anyone, it changes the timeline. She might have known he was still alive. Amy felt her stomach tighten. Why wouldn't she say anything? Ellison looked at her carefully. Grief makes people strange. Maybe she was protecting someone, or maybe she thought no one would believe her. You said she wasn't the same after Ethan went missing. Maybe this was part of why. They had the drawings sent for analysis. Amy returned to the house again that evening, the weight of her mother's silence pressing down on her chest. It made her angry, but also made her ache. Had her mother received a drawing and said nothing? Had she hidden it out of fear, or was it a desperate act of hope, preserving something so fragile she couldn't bear to share it? Amy walked into the attic again, flashlight in hand, and searched the surrounding boxes more carefully this time. In a box labeled Christmas, tucked beneath a tangled string of lights, she found something else, a plastic ornament shaped like a snowflake. It looked ordinary until she opened the back clasp and saw a photo inside. Not one she recognized. A boy, maybe 10, stared into the camera. He had Ethan's eyes, Ethan's chin, but he was older. The background showed pine trees and a simple wooden fence. The photo had been cut to fit the ornament. Amy dropped to her knees. This was no longer a mystery. It was a message. A quiet one. A mother's message. Maybe a way of keeping the unthinkable alive without speaking it aloud. That night, she made herself sit at Carol's old desk in the study and opened every drawer. In the third drawer from the bottom, taped to the underside, was a sealed white envelope with no name. Inside was a letter, not to Amy, not to David, but to herself. In Carol's fragile, looping handwriting, it read, "If you're reading this, then I am gone, and the silence has finally cracked. I saw him once. I swear to God, Amy. It was him. He was older, but I'd know my son anywhere. He was standing near the woods behind the house, watching. I didn't call the police. I was afraid. He looked scared. I tried to go outside, but he ran. I called out. He didn't stop. A week later, the truck was in the attic. And that note. And the drawing came by mail months later. No return address. I don't know who took him, but someone let him go. Or maybe he escaped. But he never came back again. And I never told you. I thought maybe he would try again. That hope. It was the only thing keeping me alive. I'm sorry." Amy cried. Not the way children cry in sudden bursts, but the deep, exhausted sob of a woman who had waited too long to ask questions. Everything she thought she knew about that day, that loss, had shifted like sand underfoot. Ethan had been alive. Carol had known. And now Amy was the only one left who could follow the faint trail he'd left behind. She wiped her eyes, clutched the letter to her chest, and whispered into the quiet house, "I won't be afraid to look. I promise you that." Amy woke the next morning with a resolve she hadn't felt in years. The letter from her mother lay on the kitchen table, its worn edges like a fragile lifeline connecting past and present. The silence in the house no longer felt suffocating. It was charged with purpose. She was going to unearth the truth, no matter how painful. First, she made a list of people who had been close to the family when Ethan disappeared. Neighbors, old friends, even distant relatives who might hold pieces of the puzzle. She reached out to some by phone, others she visited in person. Most greeted her with wary eyes, the passage of 22 years making the wounds too tender to reopen. But a few remembered the Whitakers with warmth, and one elderly neighbor, Mrs. Grayson, surprised Amy by mentioning something she had never heard before. "I always thought there was more to it," Mrs. Grayson said, sitting on her porch with the sun warming her wrinkled hands. "You remember Tommy Larson from down the road? He used to hang around your house, sometimes showing up at the picnic. I never liked the way he looked at Ethan. There was something off, always lurking in the shadows." Amy's heart pounded. She hadn't heard Tommy Larson's name in decades. Back at the house, Amy searched through old photo albums and scrapbooks looking for Tommy. There he was in faded group pictures, eyes dark and unfriendly, standing near the edge of family gatherings. She found a high school yearbook from the local school. Tommy's photo stared back at her, tall, lean, with a jaw set in permanent defiance. Something about him sent a cold wave down her spine. Amy called Detective Ellison. "I think I found someone we need to look into, Tommy Larson. He was always around when Ethan disappeared. maybe more than just coincidence. Ellison agreed to reopen the case files and check on Larson's current whereabouts. Days later, Amy was at the sheriff's office again, going through old reports. The case was marked as cold, unsolved, but the files were more than paperwork. They were a testament to a family's unraveling hope. Witness statements, police notes, search party maps, and something else caught her eye. A brief mention of an anonymous tip that came in days after Ethan vanished. The tip claimed a boy matching Ethan's description had been seen with Tommy Larson near the Old Woods. The investigators had followed up, but it was never confirmed. Amy's breath caught. That meant someone knew. Someone saw what happened, but never spoke openly. Ellison had tracked down Larson, who now lived in a rundown trailer outside of town. When confronted, Larson denied everything, dismissing the accusations with a bitter laugh. But his eyes betrayed him, a flicker of recognition when Amy mentioned Ethan's name. He told them nothing, but the sheriff's office kept him under quiet watch. At night, Amy would sit by the fireplace and reread her mother's letter. Every word was a thread pulling her deeper into the mystery, but also the heartbreak. She felt closer to her mother now, not just as a grieving woman, but as a secret keeper carrying burdens too heavy for a child. Amy realized that the family's silence had been a shield, protecting them from the unbearable truth. She also noticed a detail she had missed before. The house in the drawing wasn't just any house. It was their own, but from the back, where the woods began. The fence wasn't just a fence. It was a barrier marking where childhood ended and something darker started. Amy decided she needed to visit that place again, the woods behind the house. The thought made her uneasy, but the promise she whispered to her brother echoed stronger. "I won't be afraid." The next morning, she packed a small bag with a flashlight, a notebook, and a toy truck. She stood at the edge of the forest, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. The shadows between the trees seemed to pulse with memory, as if the woods themselves remembered that day. Stepping into the underbrush, Amy's feet sank into damp leaves. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the distant call of a crow. She moved cautiously, the sun filtering through the branches above like broken glass. She found a faint trail she and Ethan had followed so many years ago, a narrow path weaving between ancient oaks and tangled vines. After walking for nearly an hour, she reached a clearing. The ground was uneven, dotted with rocks and moss-covered logs. Amy's breath caught as she spotted something half buried in the dirt, a faded blue cap. It was Ethan's. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, the fabric stiff with age but unmistakable. Tears welled, blurring the sharp edges of the clearing. She knelt down and traced the outline of the cap in the soil. It was a sign, a mark, proof that Ethan had been here in this very spot. Amy spent hours combing the area, but the woods gave up no more clues. Still, the feeling of connection was powerful. She whispered into the trees, "I'm looking for you, Ethan. I'm coming for you." Returning home, Amy felt both exhausted and strangely lighter. She was chasing shadows, but with every step, the shadows grew clearer. The past was no longer a distant place. It was alive, waiting to be unraveled. That night, she dreamed of Ethan. He stood at the edge of the woods, older with sad eyes. "I'm here," he said softly. "I try to come back." Amy woke with a start, the dawn light spilling across the floor. The promise she'd made was no longer just words. It was a mission, one that would take her deep into the past and perhaps, finally, bring her brother home. Amy's discovery at the edge of the woods had stirred something deep inside her, a mixture of hope and fear that would not let go. The blue cap was tangible proof Ethan had been there, but what exactly had happened in those woods remained a mystery. Determined to push forward, Amy decided to revisit people who had been part of Ethan's childhood circle. She needed to unearth any detail, no matter how small, that might have slipped through the cracks of time. One afternoon, she found herself at the doorstep of Helen Parker, a retired schoolteacher who had known Ethan well. Helen's modest home smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a comforting scent that belied the tension Amy felt walking inside. They sat at a small kitchen table, cups of tea warming their hands, and Amy delicately brought up the topic of Ethan's disappearance. Helen's eyes grew distant as she recalled. Ethan was a bright boy, full of life, but he had a restless spirit. Sometimes he talked about running away, though I never took it seriously. There was a boy in town, a troublemaker, Tommy Larson. Ethan and Tommy had clashes, nothing too serious, but I did worry. Tommy had a way of intimidating others. Amy's heart tightened. The name came again, like a dark refrain. Did Helen ever see Tommy and Ethan together near the woods? She asked softly. Helen nodded slowly. Yes, a few times. But one day, shortly before Ethan disappeared, Tommy was seen dragging something near the edge of those woods. The police questioned him, but nothing came of it. Amy's mind raced. This was more than just a coincidence. The pieces of the past were assembling themselves, but there was still a gap, a silence about what truly happened. Helen continued. Your mother was quiet about it. I think she knew more than she let on, but she was afraid of what Tommy might do. Later that week, Amy and Detective Ellison discussed the new information. Ellison promised to dig into Larson's past deeper, uncovering any records of violence or suspicious activity. Meanwhile, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that the woods themselves were hiding secrets, shadows cast long by years of silence. Returning home one evening, Amy found a package slipped under her door. Inside was a worn, leather-bound journal with no note. The cover was cracked, pages yellowed, but as she opened it, she realized it was Ethan's handwriting. The entries stopped abruptly 2 weeks before his disappearance. One line chilled her. I'm scared, but I have to be brave. That night, the house felt alive with whispers of the past. Amy's journey had only just begun, but for the first time, she believed the truth could be found, and that Ethan's story was not over. Amy sat by the window, the worn leather journal resting on her lap, its pages yellowed and fragile. The dim light of the lamp cast a soft glow on the faded handwriting, her brother's handwriting, bringing him closer in a way nothing else had. She carefully turned each page, absorbing every word, every fragment of his young thoughts. It was like hearing his voice after all these years, a quiet echo from the past. The entries started innocently enough, tales of school, the neighbor's dog, birthdays, and cartoons. But as she read further, the tone shifted. There was fear, confusion, even desperation. Ethan wrote about a shadow that followed him, someone watching from the woods, someone who made him feel small and unsafe. He mentioned Tommy Larson by name several times, always in hushed, worried sentences. One entry made Amy pause. Tommy says I don't belong. I wish I could just disappear. Her heart clenched. This was no simple childhood quarrel. It was a creeping darkness growing around Ethan's life, unnoticed or ignored by those around him. The final entries were fragmented and scratched, as if he'd been hurriedly writing while glancing over his shoulder. The last line, barely legible, read, I'm scared, but I have to be brave. Amy felt tears sting her eyes, but they were tears of resolve now. She understood what Ethan had endured and why her mother had stayed silent. Fear had ruled their lives, fear of what might happen if the truth came out. But Amy knew the truth had to be uncovered now, for Ethan's sake. That same evening, she called Ellison and shared what she'd found. The detective promised to prioritize the journal in their renewed investigation. He also suggested they try to find anyone who might have seen Ethan during those final weeks, anyone who might shed light on what shadow he had described. Days passed, and Amy continued to comb through old memories and locations. She returned to the attic, now more determined than ever, sifting through dusty boxes for anything else Ethan might have left behind. Among the clutter, she found a crumpled photograph, one that hadn't been there before, or maybe she had missed it. It showed Ethan standing near the edge of the woods, clutching the very same toy truck that had been found decades later in the attic. But there was something else in the background, a figure, blurry but unmistakably tall and ominous. Amy's breath caught. She clutched the photo tightly, heart pounding. Was this the man who had taken Ethan? Or was it someone who had tried to protect him? The lines between fear and hope blurred in her mind. In the weeks that followed, Amy attended town meetings, talked to local historians, and revisited every scrap of information about Bramble County's dark past. Slowly, a picture emerged, a web of old grudges, forgotten secrets, and unspoken truths that tied the disappearance to more than just one troubled boy and a suspicious man. It was a story of a community wrestling with its own demons. Amy knew she was close. The journal had reopened the wound, but had also given her strength. Ethan's voice, faint but persistent, was guiding her through the darkness, and she was ready to follow wherever it led. Amy's discovery of the photograph stirred something in her that she could neither ignore nor fully understand. The blurry figure lurking in the background was a haunting reminder that the past was not dead. It was alive, breathing in the shadows of Bramble County. Every step Amy took into that past felt like walking deeper into a forest where sunlight barely reached, where every rustle of leaves carried whispers of long-buried secrets. She sat for hours staring at the photograph, turning it over in her hands as if it could speak. The image was grainy, the edges worn by time, but the figure's silhouette was unmistakable, tall, broad-shouldered, casting a shadow that seemed to engulf young Ethan. Who was this man? Friend or foe? Protector or predator? The questions churned in her mind, mixing with the ache in her chest that only siblings who had lost each other could know. Amy's next step was to trace the photograph's origin. She reached out to a local photographer who had archives dating back to the early 90s. The man, Mr. Daniels, was reluctant at first, but softened when Amy explained her story. After some searching, he found the original negatives. Under better light and magnification, the figure's face became clearer, a face Amy recognized instantly from Old Town records. It was a man named Harold Finch, a recluse who lived on the outskirts of town and who had a reputation for being dangerous. Harold Finch had always been a figure of suspicion in Bramble County. Rumors swirled around him like autumn leaves in the wind, tales of cruelty, unexplained disappearances, and a past that no one dared to confront openly. Yet, no one had ever been able to prove anything. He was a ghost in the town's history, an uneasy presence no one wanted to disturb. Amy felt a chill run down her spine as she learned Finch had passed away just 5 years earlier. The chance to confront him was gone, but his story was far from over. She dug deeper into local archives, unearthing old police reports and witness accounts that painted a disturbing picture. Finch had been arrested once for assault, but was released due to lack of evidence. His name had cropped up in investigations around missing children, but no charges had ever stuck. Fear and silence had allowed him to slip through the cracks of justice. In the midst of her research, Amy received a call from Detective Ellison. New evidence had come to light. Old surveillance footage from a gas station near the picnic site had surfaced. The grainy video showed a man matching Finch's description talking to a young boy resembling Ethan just days before the disappearance. The detective promised to obtain the footage and bring it to her as soon as possible. The pieces were coming together, and Amy felt both terrified and hopeful. If Finch had been involved, it would explain the shadows that had haunted her family for so long. But it also raised a dangerous question. Were there others who knew the truth and stayed silent? Who had protected Finch and why? Amy's nights were restless, haunted by dreams of Ethan wandering alone in the woods, calling out for help that never came. She clung to her mother's letter, the journal, and the toy truck, symbols of a brother lost but not forgotten. The fight for answers had become her purpose, a beacon through the fog of grief and fear. One rainy afternoon, Amy visited her mother's old house, now empty and quiet except for the echoes of the past. As she walked through the rooms, she felt the weight of years pressing down on her. Then, in the attic beneath a loose floorboard, she found an envelope sealed with fading wax. Inside was a note in her mother's handwriting. The truth is painful but necessary. Protect our family with what you learn. Trust no one blindly. Amy's breath caught. Her mother had known more than she had ever admitted. The silence that had once protected them was now a barrier Amy was determined to break. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she would face it with courage, carrying Ethan's memory and the hope that finally justice could be found. The note from her mother lay heavy in Amy's hands, the ink slightly smudged from time, but the message clear and urgent. The truth is painful but necessary. Protect our family with what you learn. Trust no one blindly. Those words echoed through Amy's mind like a warning from the past, urging her forward, yet cautioning her against the dangers ahead. For years, the silence had shielded them, her mother, her family, from harsh realities too raw to face. But now, Amy knew that silence was the true enemy, the barrier that kept Ethan's story buried deep beneath layers of fear and secrecy. Amy sat alone in the attic, the flickering light casting long shadows over the dusty floorboards. She could almost hear the whispers of the past, the laughter of a child, the rustle of leaves where Ethan had vanished, the muted voices of those who chose to remain silent. Her fingers traced the edges of the faded letter, and she felt the weight of decades pressing on her shoulders. The search for answers was no longer just about finding Ethan. It was about healing a family and a community scarred by wounds too long ignored. Determined to understand what her mother had tried to protect, Amy began digging into old family records and forgotten diaries. Her mother's journals revealed a different story than the one Amy had known, one filled with fear, threats, and a desperate attempt to shield her children from invisible menace. There were entries about late-night phone calls, strangers lurking near their home, and an unspoken promise to keep the family safe at any cost. One passage stood out starkly, a cryptic mention of a pact made among several families in the town, a silent agreement to bury the past and move on. The implication was clear. Many knew something about Ethan's disappearance, but chose to protect each other instead of the truth. Amy's heart ached at the thought of the betrayal hidden beneath that quiet loyalty. Driven by these revelations, Amy reached out to an old family friend, Margaret Collins, who had been close to her mother during those turbulent years. Meeting Margaret in a small cafe filled with the scent of fresh coffee and aged wood, Amy felt the weight of years in the gentle woman's eyes. Margaret hesitated before speaking, but then revealed what she had long held inside. There were threats, Amy. Your mother was scared. Harold Finch wasn't acting alone. There were others, powerful people in town, who wanted to keep things buried. Your family was warned to stay quiet. This confession was both a breakthrough and a curse. Amy realized the danger was greater than she had imagined. The shadows in Bramble County were not just the ghosts of one man, but a network of silence built on fear and complicity. She knew now that confronting the truth would be painful, perhaps even perilous, but there was no turning back. Back at home, Amy reviewed every piece of evidence: the journal, the photograph, the letter, and Margaret's words. Each thread wove into a tapestry of hidden alliances and betrayals. She called Detective Ellison again, sharing the new insights. Together, they planned a renewed investigation, hoping to break through the town's wall of silence. Yet, as days turned into weeks, Amy felt eyes watching her, shadows lengthening at every corner. Friends became distant. Conversations stopped when she entered the room, and whispers followed her through the streets. Fear crept into her life, the same fear her mother had known, the same fear that had kept so many quiet. One evening, Amy found a message slipped under her door, a single sentence scrawled on a torn piece of paper: "Stop digging, or you'll disappear too." Her pulse quickened, but she swallowed the terror. This was the moment she had feared, and it only strengthened her resolve. Ethan's story deserved to be told, no matter the cost. In the quiet hours of that night, Amy stood by the window, looking out at the darkened woods that had swallowed her brother so many years ago. The trees whispered in the wind, as if beckoning her deeper into the mystery. Her heart was heavy but determined. She was ready to face the darkness, to bring light to the shadows, and to finally uncover the truth hidden beneath the silence. Amy knew the note slipped under her door was not just a warning. It was a challenge. The shadows around Bramble County had grown darker, more dangerous, but she was no longer willing to retreat into silence. For years, she had lived in the space between hope and despair, and now, the time had come to step fully into the light, no matter what awaited her. Her conversations with Detective Ellison grew more urgent. Together, they pieced together the fragmented clues, from old police reports to witness testimonies, and the unsettling pattern of silence that had protected those responsible for so long. Ellison's reassurances gave Amy strength. He promised to stand by her through every step, facing the ghosts of the past alongside her. One afternoon, Amy arranged to meet with Margaret Collins again. The cafe was quieter this time, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken fears. Margaret hesitated, but finally shared a story that chilled Amy to her core, about a secret meeting held shortly after Ethan's disappearance, where local leaders had decided to bury the truth to protect their own reputations. She named names, men and women who held power, who chose loyalty to their own above justice for a missing child. Amy listened, heart pounding, as Margaret described how her mother had begged for help, but her pleas were met with cold silence. They told her to stop asking questions, or worse would come, Margaret said quietly. She was trapped between love and fear, trying to protect you and your father while hiding the truth. That night, Amy lay awake, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her. She thought of Ethan, his frightened journal entries, the toy truck found after all these years, and the shadowy figure in the photograph. All signs pointed to a darkness that had swallowed her brother and threatened to swallow her too. Determined, Amy decided to visit the old Finch property on the outskirts of town, now abandoned but still steeped in menace. Walking through the overgrown yard, she felt the eyes of the past watching her. The house was a shell, the windows boarded up, but inside she found remnants, a child's drawing pinned to a wall, a rusted bicycle frame, and scraps of newspaper clippings about missing children from decades ago. It was a place frozen in time, a silent witness to horrors untold. Amy's breath caught when she found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a faded map of the woods, marked with strange symbols and notes. It was a chilling puzzle piece, evidence of a secret life hidden behind the mask of Finch's reclusive existence. Returning home, Amy shared the findings with Detective Ellison. The investigation gained new momentum. Ellison coordinated with forensics and specialists, hoping to uncover physical evidence that could finally bring closure. But as Amy drew closer to the truth, the threats escalated. One night, she found her car vandalized, tires slashed, and a message scratched into the paint. Stay away. Yet the fear did not deter her. It fueled her resolve. She was no longer just a sister searching for answers. She was a force demanding justice. Through the long nights and cold mornings, Amy held onto one thought. Ethan's disappearance had been more than a tragic accident. It was a wound inflicted by those who chose secrecy over justice. And now, after 22 years, the wound was ready to heal. The past was no longer a shadow to hide from, but a story to confront, piece by painful piece. Amy was ready to face the darkness, to break the silence, and to honor her brother by uncovering the truth that had been buried too long. The days following Amy's discovery of the map in Finch's abandoned house were filled with a tense mixture of hope and fear. Detective Ellison had managed to get a warrant to search the property more thoroughly, and specialists were brought in to examine the hidden compartments and the surrounding woods. But the real breakthrough came unexpectedly when Amy received a phone call from a woman she never expected to hear from again. Her name was Ruth, a quiet figure from the past who had been a close friend of Ethan's before his disappearance. Ruth had long since moved away from Bramble County and lived a quiet life in a distant state. Yet, despite the years and distance, something compelled her to reach out to Amy. The voice on the other end was hesitant but determined. "I've been watching, Amy. I never stopped hoping someone would find the truth." Ruth's words struck a chord deep within Amy's soul. She was no longer alone in this journey. Ruth offered to meet, and when they did, the floodgates of memory opened. Ruth spoke of Ethan's last days before the picnic, the boy who had confided in her fears about a strange man following him, the boy who had sensed danger long before anyone else did. Ruth's recollections were vivid and heartbreaking. She described a shadowy figure who had watched Ethan from afar, someone who seemed to appear wherever the boy went, always just out of sight. Ruth had tried to tell her parents and the local authorities, but her concerns had been dismissed as childish imagination. Now, years later, her words carried the weight of truth. Together, Amy and Ruth revisited the places Ethan had loved. The old playground, the creek by the picnic site, the woods that seemed to hold so many secrets. Each location was a silent witness to the boy's last moments of innocence. It was in the creek's muddy banks that Ruth found a small, rusted object, a locket engraved with the initials E. The discovery sent a shiver down Amy's spine. It was a tangible connection to her brother's vanished world. The locket was sent for forensic analysis, and the results hinted at a timeline aligning with Ethan's disappearance. It became a crucial piece of evidence that reignited the investigation and put pressure on local authorities to revisit old files with new urgency. Yet, as progress was made, the darkness lurking in Bramble County's corners deepened. Amy's house was broken into, but nothing was stolen. Only files and photographs related to Ethan's case were scattered, a cruel reminder that someone was watching, trying to erase the past once again. Despite these threats, Amy's resolve did not waver. The community began to whisper, and some neighbors who had once kept their distance started coming forward with small, seemingly insignificant details that painted a broader picture of fear and silence. Amy realized that the town itself was an unseen witness, scarred but alive, aching to tell its story. The families who had kept quiet were now burdened with guilt, and slowly, the walls of silence began to crumble. One evening, while reviewing documents, Amy found a forgotten diary belonging to Harold Finch. The entries were chilling, detailing his obsessions, the children he watched, and cryptic references to a network of people protecting him. It was a window into a disturbed mind, but more importantly, it was a key to understanding the depths of the cover-up. Amy felt a wave of exhaustion, but also clarity. The fight for truth was not just about Ethan. It was about breaking a cycle of fear that had held the town captive for decades. With Ruth by her side, Detective Ellison's support, and the slow awakening of the community, Amy took a deep breath. The unseen witnesses of Bramble County were finally beginning to speak. Amy's discovery of Harold Finch's diary marked a turning point in the investigation, shifting the quiet town of Bramble County into a simmering cauldron of tension and unease. The diary's pages revealed more than just Finch's disturbing thoughts. They exposed the shadows behind a web of secrecy that had entangled so many lives. Each entry peeled back layers of deception, naming names and exposing alliances that had kept Ethan's disappearance shrouded for more than 2 decades. With Detective Ellison's help, Amy cross-referenced the diary's contents with old police reports, witness statements, and public records. The diary mentioned meetings between Finch and prominent town figures, including a few law enforcement officers who had once vowed to protect their community but had instead protected themselves. The realization was staggering. The conspiracy was not the work of one man, but a carefully guarded secret upheld by a network determined to preserve their own reputations and silence any dissent. The diary spoke of cleaning up after incidents involving children who had disappeared or gone missing under mysterious circumstances. Finch's writing was cold and detached, as if the pain of those losses had been twisted into something impersonal, something to be managed rather than mourned. Amy shuddered, imagining the horrors her brother might have faced and the terrible cost of silence. But amid the grim revelations, there was also a glimmer of hope. Finch's last entries showed signs of doubt and fear. He was losing control of the network, worried that someone would expose them. There were mentions of secret locations where evidence was hidden, places meant to bury the past physically and metaphorically. Amy felt the pieces falling into place. The toy truck found in her attic was just the beginning. As news of the diary's contents spread, the community's facade began to crack. Some townspeople denied everything, clinging to old loyalties and fearful of the upheaval truth might bring. Others, long burdened by guilt, started to come forward with small but critical pieces of information. Amy listened to their stories, whispers of strange visits, hushed warnings, and glimpses of people who had vanished or been silenced. Among these voices was a man named Carl, once a young boy in Bramble County who had grown up haunted by a secret he'd never shared. He approached Amy quietly, revealing a chilling memory of a hidden room beneath Finch's property, a place where children's belongings were dumped and where screams might have been heard but were never answered. Determined to follow this lead, Amy and Detective Ellison organized a search of the Finch estate's basement and surrounding grounds. The team uncovered a concealed cellar, its entrance masked beneath years of decay and overgrowth. Inside, they found remnants of the past, discarded toys, old clothes, and disturbingly, makeshift cages. The air was thick with the weight of untold stories and unimaginable suffering. The evidence was undeniable. Amy's heart ached with every step she took through that forgotten space. Each discovery was a brutal reminder of the boy she had lost and the injustice that had nearly erased him from existence. But the truth had emerged at last, and with it came a promise of justice, not just for Ethan, but for all the forgotten children. The revelations sent shockwaves through Bramble County. Law enforcement reopened cold cases. Community leaders faced scrutiny, and a wave of support began to form around Amy and her family. The town was forced to confront its past, grappling with pain and betrayal, but also with the possibility of healing. For Amy, the journey was far from over. The path ahead was daunting, filled with legal battles, public outcry, and the slow process of rebuilding trust. Yet she knew that each step forward was a tribute to Ethan's memory, a vow that no child would ever be forgotten again. In the weeks that followed the shocking discoveries beneath the Finch estate, Bramble County found itself at a crossroads. The quiet town that had long hidden its darkest secrets behind polite smiles and whispered rumors was now a place of reckoning and painful truths. Amy watched as her community struggled with the weight of its past. Neighbors turned wary, old friendships fractured, and a pervasive sense of guilt hanging heavy in the air. Yet amid the turmoil, something remarkable was beginning to take shape, a collective will to heal. Amy's own journey through this storm was deeply personal and often overwhelming. The reopening of the investigation meant reliving trauma she had buried for years. The image of Ethan's bright smile, the sound of his laughter mingled with the silence that followed his disappearance. She grappled with the anger at those who had betrayed her family's trust, but also with a profound sorrow for the lives lost or forever changed. Support came in unexpected forms. Ruth, who had become her closest confidant, stood by her side with unwavering strength. Together, they began organizing gatherings for families affected by disappearances, creating a space where pain could be shared and survivors could find solace. These meetings, held in a modest community center, became a beacon of hope, a place where silence was replaced by voices and stories, tears mingled with laughter, and strangers became a chosen family. Detective Ellison's work progressed steadily, fueled by the new evidence and growing public pressure. Several arrests were made, including some former officials who had actively concealed the truth. The legal battles that ensued were fierce and deeply emotional, as long-buried secrets spilled into the light and justice was sought for those who had suffered in the shadows. But Amy also understood that healing was more than legal victories. It was about reclaiming life from the grip of fear. She began volunteering with local youth organizations, determined to build a future where children could grow up safe and loved. Every smile she saw in those young faces was a small triumph against the darkness that had haunted her family for so long. One quiet evening, Amy found herself standing in the attic where the toy truck had first appeared, a poignant symbol of a past she was learning to embrace rather than fear. She ran her fingers over the worn edges of the little truck, feeling a connection to Ethan that transcended time and loss. In that moment, she realized that while the wounds would never fully disappear, they could become part of a story of resilience, love, and hope. The town's journey was far from over, but for the first time in many years, there was a sense that Bramble County could begin to heal. The courage of one woman had sparked a movement, breaking the chains of silence and fear. Amy knew the road ahead would still hold challenges, but she was ready to face them, carrying her brother's memory as a guiding light toward a future where no child's disappearance would ever be forgotten. The months following the unearthing of the hidden cellar beneath Finch's estate had transformed Amy's life and the life of Bramble County in ways she never could have imagined. The trials of those implicated in the conspiracy were underway, each day peeling back layers of a dark history that many had tried desperately to bury. But amid the courtroom battles and media scrutiny, there came a quieter, more intimate chapter of the story, a moment when the truth truly came home. Amy had long hoped for some sign of Ethan beyond the cold evidence, a whisper of his spirit that might bring her a sense of closure. Then, unexpectedly, a package arrived at her door. Inside was a small, worn notebook, pages filled with a child's handwriting, drawings, and notes. It was Ethan's journal, lost to time, but miraculously preserved. The journal painted a vivid portrait of a curious, loving boy with dreams, fears, and a fierce spirit. Reading those pages late into the night, Amy felt as though Ethan was speaking to her across the years, reminding her that despite the darkness, he had lived, had loved, had hoped. The journal contained clues that led investigators to an abandoned cabin several miles from the picnic site, a place where Ethan had hidden during those terrifying hours. The cabin was modest and overgrown, but inside were signs of habitation: a makeshift bed, scattered toys, and a wall marked with dates and drawings that told the story of a child fighting to survive. The discovery of the cabin stirred the community once again. It was a tangible proof that Ethan had been there, that his disappearance had been a fight for survival and escape. It renewed a collective determination to find out what happened to him in those lost hours. DNA evidence found in the cabin matched that of Ethan's family, providing a bittersweet confirmation. Amy and her family visited the cabin, standing in silence as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying memories of a childhood stolen but not forgotten. The place was both a grave reminder and a sanctuary, a symbol of a truth that had been hidden but never erased. The trials brought justice slowly but surely. Several individuals were convicted, their sentences a small measure of reparation for the years of pain endured by families like Amy's. The media coverage was intense, but Amy focused on the personal victories, the healing of old wounds, the new bonds formed among families, and the changes enacted in local law enforcement to prevent such tragedies from happening again. One evening, at a town meeting, Amy spoke to a room filled with neighbors, friends, and strangers who had become allies in the fight for truth. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion as she thanked everyone for their courage and support. Ethan's story is not just about loss, she said. It's about the strength we find when we come together, about the hope that shines through even the darkest times. As the meeting ended, Amy looked out at the faces around her, faces marked by pain but also by resilience. In that moment, she understood that while her brother's disappearance had forever changed her life, it had also sparked a light in her community, a light that would guide Bramble County toward healing and promise. And though the final chapter of Ethan's story was still unwritten, Amy felt a profound peace. The truth had come home, not just to her family, but to an entire town ready to face its past and embrace its future. The years had passed, and Bramble County slowly transformed from a place haunted by its shadows into a community reborn through courage, truth, and healing. Amy stood in the sunlight filtering through the windows of the new memorial park, a quiet sanctuary dedicated to all the children who had been lost or forgotten. The park's centerpiece was a statue of a small boy holding a toy truck, Ethan's truck, now immortalized in bronze. It was a symbol not only of loss, but of enduring love, resilience, and hope. The journey to this moment had been long and arduous, marked by heartache and revelation. Amy often thought back to that day, 22 years ago, the family picnic where Ethan vanished so suddenly, leaving behind a silence that had echoed through her life. But now, standing in the park surrounded by families, friends, and neighbors, she felt a profound sense of peace. The darkness that once consumed her had been pierced by light. light brought forth by truth and community. Amy's work in the years since the discovery had blossomed into a foundation devoted to child safety and support for families affected by disappearances. Her voice, once quiet and shattered by grief, had become a beacon for change. She spoke at conferences, worked with law enforcement to improve protocols, and helped establish programs for children at risk. Her mission was clear: no family should endure what hers had suffered. No child should vanish into silence. The trials of those responsible had brought justice, but more importantly, they ignited a movement of accountability and transparency. The town had learned painful lessons, but from those lessons came reforms that promised a safer future. Amy often thought about how fragile life was and how crucial it was to cherish every moment, every smile, every shared story. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amy found herself alone on a bench in the park. She held the worn toy truck in her hands, no longer a relic of pain, but a cherished reminder of Ethan's spirit. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude and love. She whispered his name softly into the twilight, feeling his presence in the gentle breeze. "I miss you, Ethan," she said, "but I carry you with me, in every step, every word, every hope." Around her, the park was alive with laughter and warmth. Children played freely, their joy a testament to the strength of those who had fought for them. Amy smiled, knowing that Ethan's story had not ended with disappearance and silence, but with a new dawn, a future shaped by courage, compassion, and unbreakable bonds. As night fell, the stars began to twinkle above Bramble County, shining like distant beacons in a sky reborn. Amy looked up and felt a quiet certainty. No matter how dark the night, the light of truth and love would always find its way home. Thank you so much for joining me on this heartfelt journey through a story of loss, hope, and healing. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments below. Your stories and support help build a caring community where every voice matters. Together, we can keep the memories alive and inspire hope for a brighter tomorrow. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for being here and listening with an open heart.